CoronaVirus. Happy times are here again. New AmeriVersal US Constitution 21st century. One of five. What is at the root of all evil in society? That is the sole question that needs addressing for all else follow suit. However, for the moment, we'll leave the deeper question of celestial salvation for a later installment. At present, we'll narrow it down to a earthly success, better known as happiness. Blind optimism and living in denial are a distinction that doesn't make a difference in the real world. The problem with living in denial as extreme optimism is the valuable time wasted when we could have been busily preparing for its onslaught. We're all adults. We need to prepare to address and resolve the present crisis. Piggybacking off the quote of living in interesting times, in today's business circles, this squarely applies here as a SWOT business model of strength, weakness, opportunity, threats. Challenges are what makes us grow, whereas an easy, carefree life diminishes us on the long run. That's just human nature, and we here in America seem to magnify it exponentially. We cannot capitalize unless there are opportunities or threats precisely because our weakness as a result of our strength is success. However contradictory it may seem at first blush, there is some truth in this claim. But where does too much focusing on the head leave the heart in all this? To whom more is given, more is demanded in fair exchange, and failing is not an option. Noblesse oblige. We have been entrusted as melting pot of the world, as sample of greater humanity moving forward. It all started with the great American experiment of the United States back in the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776 at Philadelphia, and later on with the United States Constitution of 1789. We've already covered the basics of the Constitution in a previous episode. Still pending is the Declaration of Independence, which we'll now address. However, in order to do justice to such an undertaking, we pretty much have to follow through to capture the splash it made all across the world. The spark that lit the white blue sky didn't start here. Rather, the American school but was an offshoot of the 18th century times of the European Enlightenment. While it was armchair philosophy at its birthplace, across the ocean it was turned into a working shop of a nation-state model. While there's a backward-facing domino effect going from modern times, passing through the Enlightenment to the Renaissance, bypassing the Dark Middle Ages to classical antiquity in Greece, I have taken it further back to archaic Israel to discover uncharted territory after having found both the keystone to hold our times together as well as the missing cornerstone of our civilization. This has already been amply layered in this pyramidal effort, soon to be finally crowned. At present, we're at the engineering stage of applying the knowledge acquired of hermeneutics as science and philosophy and symbolism and Kabbalah combined as triad parts PRD in one whole as paradise. Just like in speaking a foreign language, you cannot explain the explanation at every step. Same applies here. I'll have to assume previous knowledge in order to plow ahead undeterred. That said, let's start with some seminal ideas from the authors of the Enlightenment to follow with the founding documents of the modern world we presently live in and which, by the look of things, is in dire need of a makeover. Just like a brand new car out of the assembly line, which by the time it's gone through its useful life, it is quite obsolete, there's quite an album of memories associated with it, no doubt about it, but unless you like driving a classical motor vehicle, most buyers will probably shop the marketplace for a later model. While no pretension to scholarship is intended here, nevertheless, there are some low-lying fruits which to start with, leaving the higher-ups to seasoned ladder and tree climbers. The primeval place to start without a doubt is Genesis 1:1a and its accompanying prime teaching lesson of paradise. This I have already done such that any place thereafter to land and restart the narrative will do just as well. Thus, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his book The Social Contract, introduced the concept of people as sovereign, as general will, overthrowing the previously held belief of divine right of kings to rule. King Louis XIV of France used to say, "I am the state," and out of noblesse oblige, to whom much is given, much is expected, the king would impart justice solely out of the goodness of his heart. This notion goes back to biblical times of King David as the Mashiach anointed by the prophet Samuel, as in Book 1 Samuel. But recall also from biblical times that before kings there was Bnei Israel, children of Israel, the people, which had direct communication with the Creator. In any case, let's continue our narrative. The idea behind the social contract is that individuals renounce part of their freedom in exchange for protection by the state of their life, liberty, and property. But renouncing doesn't turn the individual into a slave of the state thereafter. Rather, there are a batch of rights retained which the same state must safeguard, besides the above-mentioned triad of values. These are what's generally called human rights. These rights and powers we saw safeguarded in the United States Constitution in Amendments 9 and 10 as, quote, rights retained by the people, and, quote, powers reserved to the people, respectively. Also, in a comparative study, we found similar rights safeguarded in Article 39 of the Mexican Constitution as, quote, the national sovereignty resides essentially and originally in the people. While many more also brilliant thinkers contributed heavily both before and after the notion of sovereignty, like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and many more too numerous to mention, what we'll do instead is jump straight into selected historical documents that employ these very same building block notions in their construction. But let's not get lost in the detail of things, losing sight in the process of the big picture view of things. What we're after is the defining characteristics of what a new American and universal constitution would be for the third millennium, fresh out of the assembly line for any and all nations to acquire and put to good use in edification out of the ruins of the epidemic shutdown. Our reason is going to be of the abductive type, like that employed in the case of the bird that looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, and which we conclude that most likely it is a duck. Just using plain horse sense without as much as taking a sample of its DNA, we can figure things out on our own. Towards this end, we'll study the short list of the following foundational documents of democracy. Quote, Preamble of the Declaration of Independence of the United States of 1776, and the, quote, the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen of France 1789, and lastly, quote, the Preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations 1948, as well as the, quote, Preamble to the Charter of the United States in both textual and paradise construction. This should suffice to prove the point within reasonable doubt that the main question at issue is how to upgrade the performance of the social contract from 18th century Enlightenment ideas of the second millennium to 21st century paradise hopes and aspirations of the third millennium. All this should end with a prototype of a constitution incorporating the latest advances of rationality. This is the first of 5 parts of the series. Please don't miss the next 4 episodes, and most of all, the happy ending of the new Constitution for America and Universal, and by inclusion for the whole wide world. Well, that's all, people. Yours truly, Rick, your Charro Anusim, and GD Bless. Austin, Texas, capital of the world.